Hello everybody, this is Lara from Pure Elliott Wave with your Monday to Friday update for Bitcoin, Ethereum and XRP. Now we're all having upward days, Ethereum particularly, Bitcoin not so much, a little bit of an inside day. This little inside session so far for the 29th of February, it looks like a wee pause after the excesses of the 28th. This is a huge range day. Didn't manage to make new all-time highs, but it's pretty close. I don't think we're going to manage to make all-time highs in February. It's got this extra day as today's 29th. It's a leap year, but I don't think it's going to manage it. I think it needs a little wee rest after yesterday. I think we might be about to see another very short-term small consolidation before it gathers the strength to break above resistance at 68,800 and makes new all-time highs. This has all the markings of a parabolic growth curve from Bitcoin, a slow start, stronger in the middle, and acceleration at the end. That's really normal behavior for cryptocurrencies when they are in a parabolic growth phase, and they tend to have push from volume and increase volatility at and toward the end of parabolic growth phases. This volume for the 28th of February is the strongest volume we've seen from Bitcoin since March 2023. This is absolutely huge volume, and that strongly supports this upward movement and strongly gives us an indication that we're probably going to see new all-time highs sooner rather than later, but we might see a little bit of a consolidation first. Normal to be expected behavior and a really healthy feature of an ongoing bull market. So if we do have that consolidation, I'll be quite pleased with that. ADX tells us that at the daily time frame, the upward trend is intact and a very, very long way to go before it reaches as extreme as it can get for this market. RSI is more deeply overbought. Now I keep saying wait for your pivots to develop between price and RSI and price and money flow or any other indicator you're using to exhibit divergence. If we had expected that there was bearish divergence and called for it back on the 26th or even 27th of February, we would have missed that huge upward movement for the 28th. It would have caught us by surprise. We would have been calling for a pullback because we would have said, well, there's bearish divergence. It means that there's weakness in upward movement. But you need to wait for a pivot to develop. Here's a pivot, here's a pivot, here's another one. Bit short though, here's a decent pivot. So in order for a pivot on price to develop, I want to see at least two, one really big or preferably two downward sessions up off a high to then say that a pivot on price has developed, and then you look for a corresponding pivot on RSI or money flow, and then you identify your divergence. Do not anticipate pivots, wait till they've actually developed. Here we saw potential bearish divergence, it's just disappeared. RSI is now more deeply overbought. It can get even further deeply overbought when this market has a strong bullish run. This is a very extreme market. We have to allow room for our indicators to reach very extreme conditions, and I understand that from a strong analysis of previous price behavior for this market. Money flow is also overbought. We could identify potential bearish divergence here, but I'm not going to do that because there's no pivot developed on price and money flow. ATR is showing a strong increase as price moves higher. This is really good to see. It's very normal when cryptocurrencies have parabolic growth phases to have them strongly supported by increasing volume and increasing ATR as a measure of increasing volatility. I am going to give you guys a link today to this talk by Bartlett. Sadly, he's no longer with us. He was a professor of physics at Colorado University, and this is a really famous talk he's given. It looks at how exponential growth works. He's got some good examples, I think quite simple math, so it's not particularly difficult, and he's got some good visualizations here. The big takeaway I'd like for you to get from this is how exponential growth works. It has a doubling time, and this is the really big key that you'll really get a visceral understanding of by watching his talk. Right before the end, at the final doubling time, you're only halfway there. Wrap your heads around what that means when a cryptocurrency is in a parabolic growth phase. It has a doubling time. Right before the end, final high of a big third wave, you're only halfway there in terms of doubling time. So imagine what that means for your potential profits at the end of a big third wave. So you have to be really onto it and focus analysis on your markets every day when you're getting toward the end of a parabolic growth phase, so that you can try and identify when that growth phase has ended. Now, I'm not going to try and pick a high. I'm going to wait for confirmation that a high is in place using the same technical analysis methods I used in December 2017 to identify that high 6 days after it formed, and then I'm going to wait for a dead cat bounce, and that's when I'm going to try and exit, if I indeed exit at the big end of the next big third wave. But this is a really important concept, so let me know in comments if you watch this talk and did it help you understand exponential growth and how it applies to cryptocurrencies. My Elliott Wave count for Ethereum, it's making a new short-term highs, not yet at all-term highs. Next resistance above about 3,800. We'll look at that on technicals. It's broken above this upper edge of this base channel. It didn't really have a back test of support, maybe the lower wick of the 28th of February, but not really, and it's just moving up and away. So I won't expect a pullback down to here. I expect pullbacks now to be more brief and shallow than they have been for quite some time. Ethereum is also moving through an exponential growth phase. These ballpark figures are using an extreme Fibonacci ratio, 11.09. I wouldn't use this for Bitcoin or XRP, it's too small, but for Ethereum, it's still conservative, but not too conservative. When we get toward the end of these third waves, I'll start to use lower degrees to zoom in on what could be potential targets, and then I'll call them targets and have a little bit more confidence in them. I'm looking for the end of a third wave at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 at larger time frames. We've also got intermediate, primary and cycle. A third wave at 8 degrees is unfolding. We should expect an acceleration through the middle and an explosion at the end. When cryptocurrencies form parabolic growth curves, at the end they have vertical upward movement for sometimes up to 5 weeks, but usually 2, 3 or 4 weeks. So I will be expecting blow-off tops for one or more of these third waves, especially minor, intermediate and primary, and definitely cycle degree. That's a really high probability. Next resistance, 3,580, and I did say a few days ago that there's not a lot of resistance between support at 2,700 and resistance at 3,580, so I did expect just a straight upward move, and that's exactly what we're getting for Ethereum. It's past the target from the triangle at 3,347, so let's take that off. Moving average situation, full bull bullish, short is above the mid, which is above the long. Probability of good things happening when your moving averages look like that is higher than not. Ethereum showing a strong increase in volume for the 28th of February. I'll expect a further increase in volume. ADX tells us the upward trend for Ethereum is now very extreme, but not as extreme as it can get when this market has a bullish run. RSI is more deeply overbought. It can get further deeply overbought when this market has a bullish run. It can then exhibit short-term bearish divergence before we see any sizable pullback or consolidation. Money flow is also overbought, and again, I'm not going to identify bearish divergence because there's no pivot developed here with price and money flow. ATR showing a steady, strong increase in range as a measure of volatility as price moves higher, is a feature of a bullish run and not a bear market rally. Let's walk through the full Elliott Wave count for XRP today. This is my main Elliott Wave count at the monthly time frame. I expect from this low to this high there is a 5-step forward pattern, has a pretty good fit. It lasted 3 years, so I'll call it cycle wave 1. From this high to this low there is a double zigzag 3-step back pattern. It lasted 2 years, so this is fitting for cycle wave 2. The proportions here are really good. From this low to this high, there is a leading diagonal. I will label that primary wave 1, and a deep zigzag, primary wave 2. Cycle 2 is a 96% correction of cycle 1. Primary 2 is a 91% correction of primary 1. This is a normal depth for corrections for cryptocurrencies or bear markets. Primary 1 lasted a year, primary 2 lasted a year and 2 months. So far, the proportion is looking really good for XRP. Another leading diagonal for intermediate 1, a very brief, relatively shallow zigzag for intermediate 2, tells us there might now be a strong upward pull of a third wave at 3 degrees, pulling intermediate 2 up to be a little bit more shallow. It's still deep, but a little bit more shallow than I was expecting. Intermediate 2, if it were to continue, may not move beyond the start of 1 below 0.2794. If you like, take a screenshot with the targets. I've been over these before, but I shan't go over them again, or this video would be 10 years long. Alternatively, I'm trying to not have a bullish bias and consider, what if my Elliott Wave count is wrong? It does look Possibly, like there could be a triangle over down here, and I'll label this possibly complete, or no, it needs to move a little bit lower. Possibly a nearly complete triangle, so we could have a 5-step forward pattern followed by a sideways triangle. If this is a triangle, the angle of entry was upward, so the angle of exit should be upward, because Elliott Wave triangles, unlike classic triangle patterns, which can be reversal or continuation patterns, Elliott Wave triangles are always continuation patterns because they're always in a B or fourth wave, so you've got the C or fifth wave to follow, which is the same direction as the A or third wave. So here we've got A, B, C, but the triangle has to complete first. That's the problem. We've got a zigzag for A, double zigzag for B, zigzag for C and D, but E needs to complete its zigzag. Trying to label E over at the low of this candlestick, it would be far too brief. That would be absolutely too forced. I would not. It's technically correct, and that would be maybe a mistake that someone who doesn't have a lot of experience with Elliott Wave would make, but I'm not going to publish anything that sees an E wave that brief, and shallow too. Now it has to take a little bit longer, so we have to see A, B, C. C has to move below the end of A, so this triangle wave count requires a new low below 0.4456 in order for primary wave E to have a decent look, and intermediate C to avoid a truncation. It has to move beyond the end of A. It's really unusual for subwaves to have truncations. Sometimes they do in triangles, but really unusual. Most common point for E to N would be with a small overshoot of the AC trend line. Primary E may not move beyond the end of C below 0.2794. If we do see more downward movement for XRP and a triangle completes, then I would possibly even go to this as my main wave count if the triangle looked that good and completed as expected. When the triangles complete, this wave count would then expect an upward breakout for a strong upward wave for cycle wave C to move beyond the end of A and possibly be equal in length with A, and it was 2.7552 in length. Follow on the main Elliott wave count from the monthly chart. The high of intermediate 1 here is this point here on the weekly. Here is a leading expanding diagonal, meets all of the rules for that structure. Within an expanding diagonal, 3 is longer than, usually is longer than 1, and 5 is longer than 1 and often longer than 3. The trend lines diverge. Within a leading diagonal, subwaves 2 and 4 must be zigzags. Subwaves 1, 3 and 5 are most commonly zigzags, but may also appear to be impulses. After the expanding diagonal for intermediate 1, there's a deep zigzag. For intermediate 2, it's a 74.5% correction of intermediate wave 1. That's the arithmetic calculation, not a log function. And so it is relatively deep, but not as deep as the 80 to 90+% correction that cryptocurrency second waves usually are. So I was originally expecting it to be a bit deeper. But now from this low to this high, we've got another 5-wave structure, another diagonal upward. And look at the curve of this. This is parabolic growth. This is exponential growth. Slow start, acceleration through the middle, explosion at the end. Minor 1 is now followed by a deep correction for minor 2, and minor 3 looks likely to be beginning. We're starting to see some strength and upward movement. Low for minor 2 down here is this point down here. Now we're looking at possibly another expanding diagonal unfolding, this time for minute wave 1. This one still needs a little bit more upward movement to complete minuet wave 3, because minuet 3 has to be longer than minuet wave 1. And the only reason I'm expecting that so early in this diagonal structure, in order for these two candlestick wicks to not overshoot the diagonal trend line, 4 is going to have to be longer than 2, which indicates the diagonal should be expanding. So I'm expecting a zigzag up for 3 to continue higher to reach above 0.6170. That's the point at which should be equal in length with the first wave. Within the zigzag, subminuet A now looks like a leading expanding diagonal. I'll expect a pullback for B, and then C to move up to new short-term highs to reach this point or above. When that's happened and we can see a complete zigzag complete for minuet 3, I'll then be expecting a deep correction for minuet 4 to overlap back into wave 1 price territory but not move beyond the end of 2. When 4 is complete, another zigzag up for 5 to move beyond the end of 3, because fifth waves of diagonals may not end in truncations. If this does all unfold as expected and a diagonal completes for minute wave 1, I'll then expect a relatively deep correction for minute wave 2. And finally, when that's over, then I'll be expecting a really strong upward move for XRP for a third wave at multiple degrees. But right now I expect it's still in a first wave, and it's going to be choppy, overlapping, so it's probably going to lag the other two for several weeks to come. It's just going to be a bit slower. Most unfortunate. Real quick, technicals on the daily for XRP, still finding resistance, unable to break above 60 cents, a very long bullish long lower wick for the 28th of February, finding support about the 54-55 cent mark. It wasn't able to close below that, but it did get back down into that area a little bit deeper than I expected. Again, if we see pullbacks at this stage, I'll expect support about the 54-55 cent area. Let's see if it can close above resistance at 60 cents. If it does, there is actually a bit of congestion here up to 0.675. We've got some resistance areas up here, about 64 cents on the way up. I may add some more lines in here to recognize that in coming days. Yesterday was an upward session. It had push from volume, but the candlestick closed red, so that's contradictory. When the direction and the color of the candlestick are contradictory, you've got to look inside to identify your volume profile, which I'm not going to do today because for the short term it's just not that important. ADX is declining, the DX lines are whipsawing for XRP, there's no clear trend, and that's pretty normal behavior for a diagonal with all of its choppy, overlapping, hesitant movement. Diagonals take some of their personality from the corrective wave that precedes them. So that previous correction down from -2, which was pretty time consuming and deep, that feeling just hasn't yet left XRP, so it's got all of this choppy movement to do a lot of work up off the low as it forms basing action. RSI is still in neutral, as is money flow. ATR shows an increase in volatility, volume returns to the market. Even though this is chopping and overlapping, it has some hallmarks of a bullish run, the early stages, and not a bear market rally. So I still am bullish for XRP. It's just going to take its time up off the low. And that's it from me today with your update. I hope everyone's having a lovely day.